Welcome. My name is Michael French. I'm the Regional Vice President for Robert Half, based in downtown Toronto. Thank you for joining us today. We have a very interesting topic: how to onboard new employees in these very uncertain, unprecedented times. We've been asked many times by clients, what happens now when I hire a person? And we've put together a great 45-minute session that helps you get from offer to start. The session today is going to cover 4 distinct set parts. The first part is going to cover preparing for successful onboard, post-offer prior to the first day. Second set, the great first day. Third part, the importance of the first week. And the final set is how to make sure that the employee settles in week 2 to 4. The webinar today will have a chat feature enabled, so feel free to ask any questions you like on the chat. Our facilitator today is Cami Schneiderman. She has been with Robert Half for over 21 years. She's currently the Manager of Enterprise Leadership Development. I've known Cami for a long time and excited anytime that we get to work together. In her role with us, she has a global reach of providing training for managers across the world. Cami, I send it off to you.
Yes, thank you, Mike, and welcome to you all. We are really excited that you could join us to really step through some ideas and practical tips and sharing of best practices as we look to onboard new employees remotely. My guess is if you joined us, there could be a few scenarios that you might have happening for you. One, you might be actively working with some of our members of Robert Half looking to onboard a contractor, or perhaps you're in the midst of hiring a full-time employee. Maybe you're not hiring through us, but you're really looking at how might we navigate this on our own, as we do have some critical roles that we need to fill. You know, some of you might have actually put some roles on pause. Many companies, just with the current environment and maybe just not having some of the resources available to enable remote work with some of your employees, you've had to put it on pause for a bit. And we also know that many of you are actually joining us because you're part of the support network that when you do onboard employees, be it now or in the foreseeable future, that you just have some natural curiosities around how do we do this? You're certainly not alone. As Mike mentioned, myself and my team, we really come alongside of our internal network of Robert Half leaders across the globe. And they also share many of those same questions. And it's just, you know, this kind of unique environment where we are largely still remote. And as we look to actually transition into what many are calling kind of the adjusted normal, if you will, we still have to think about how do we take our newest employees and replicate some of that same experience that they have if we can't physically be together. Some of you as leaders might be thinking, you know, wow, how do I navigate this? I'm busy. We might be operating with a leaner team and kind of thinking about the enormous task of doing that and having real concerns over, you know, how do I create a great experience, but how do we really adjust for some of the, just the cultural components of making sure somebody's successful in our environment. And here's what I can say. I know that I have personally experienced it. Our team does indeed onboard individuals remotely, and I can say with certainty it is absolutely possible. We have come alongside of some of our Robert Half clients who have had mission critical work, deliverables that have had to be executed on, and we have found a way to overcome some of the challenges that you're facing or just kind of navigating this together. As Mike mentioned, I spent a number of years working for Robert Half, and kind of the first 14 years was in our branch field operations, onboarding people physically into the office. And since I work now in our leadership development team over the past 8 years, we largely travel, or I guess did up until February, we largely travel for our role, and we home office. I'm coming to you from my home office. So that means that as we've added members of our team, we've done it remotely. So while we don't have all the answers, we definitely have, you know, come and organize this webinar so that you have a few perspectives on what is working for us internally, what guidance have we provided to some of our clients, And also we've heard a lot of and gathered best practices from many of you as we've had conversations around how your environments have shifted, how your process might have shifted, and just some of the guidance that you've given. So we're going to really dive into 4 main areas. And what I'm hoping is that it helps you to begin to see that it is a different process, but it's absolutely possible. I know for me personally, the last person I onboarded was in Q3 of last year. It was in the midst of our busiest time. I was traveling every week. And if you're a leader, it definitely might feel as though, how in the world would I have time? And so what I can say is that it really forced me to be a bit more intentional. I had to take some time to get creative around, if it can't be me personally to do some of these tasks, how can I really create a network of people that can help that this individual is going to be supportive? How can I slow down to think and be more planful? And on the previous slide, what I guess we would challenge you to think about as we go through this is that so often we think about someone's contribution that they will offer in this given role. We think about the job description and how do we articulate that? But in this environment especially, because we don't have the benefit of being physically together, we also have to think about how do we articulate our culture in a way that someone could still understand the dynamics, the principles, the values, and behaviors that really that's required of this individual to be successful. We had to really think consciously around if somebody was in our office or had a chance to step into the walls of our company, what would they observe? And outside of that job description, let's do our best job to articulate the culture and really mine for that in some of those interviews so that we can be really specific to make sure that somebody's successful joining our company. And last but not least, one of the things that we're also considering, and we certainly have put out there as a challenge for many of you to think about, is keeping an eye on the career goals of the individual. Now more than ever, we have found internally, and we've also heard this from many of you, that we are using people's talents and gifts in new ways. That because in many cases we might be operating in really lean teams, you know, maybe some of these jobs have started to kind of cross with other teams. And so we also recommend that even if you are looking to onboard someone on just a contract basis or an interim basis for something specific, is that we still pay attention to what are those long-term career goals. We know that they can be utilized in new and unique ways as we still as organizations kind of figure out how to navigate and adjust to the ever-changing environment. So one thing I did want to call out here as we step through all of these tips and really look at these 4 stages of remote onboarding is we often get the question, will you share the deck with us? And I do want to just rest assured and let you know that indeed we will be sharing all of these tips. So you're welcome to take notes, or you can certainly sit back and take in a lot of the best practice and recommendations. But yes, indeed, we will be sharing that with you. We're going to dive into 4 stages. And although you might define this a little differently, how we look at this is we're going to take a look at the post-offer acceptance stage. That could be as little as 2 days up to a couple weeks from the moment that you pull the trigger to say, yes, we would like to onboard this individual. Day 1 is literally day 1 of onboarding. Week 1 is really that phase of how do I set this person up for success? How do I get clear on expectations and really make sure I set them off in a solid way so that they can be able to work towards autonomy and mastery of their role. And then we'll also speak to what do weeks 2 to 4 look like, and what might be some strategies, and how might it shift and look a little different from those early days of onboarding someone in a remote way. As we dive into this, one thing we did want to introduce to you is something that's been a helpful tool for us, which is the RACI model. And for those of you that are currently project management professionals, or that was part of your previous life, this is not a new term. The RACI model stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And really how we use it, in essence, it's a responsibility assignment matrix. I don't know about some of you, but if you're in the midst of thinking about onboarding someone, you've got your own job responsibilities to think about. This might seem a little overwhelming, or we know that many of you are HR professionals And you might be getting some resistance from leaders to say, gosh, I want to hold off because I just don't have the time. What we have found is that this has taken that enormous task of onboarding, and it's been helpful to really jot down all of the milestones, the tasks that are associated, and to get clear in our minds around who really needs to be responsible for some of these tasks. I know it challenged me to really think about, as I onboarded our latest consultant to our team, is I really challenged myself to say, but does it really have to be me? Could it be someone else in our team that could fill that gap? Especially as I was traveling and really busy with meetings, it really challenged me to say, who else could be part of the village that could help to knock out some of these tasks of onboarding them? Accountable really does cause you to think about, at the end of the day, who might be responsible for those tasks, but at the end of the day, who signs off to say that it's done? In many cases, that could be you. It might be a direct line manager. It might be someone who's managing that process of onboarding in HR. But again, it just looks at the differentiation between responsible and accountable. This consulted and informed also really challenged me to think about, as we drop individuals into an organization, oftentimes they're immediately inserted into projects. They're immediately inserted into a cadence of meetings. And it really caused me to slow down to say, who else will this individual work with? Where do these paths cross? Who are the individual subject matter experts rather, that they might have to have some touch points with? And then also just keeping people informed. I know many times we might forget to inform really important people that don't have day-to-day contact, but it's just good to know that, yes, indeed, someone's coming aboard. They might have to help prepare. They might have to invite them to key meetings. I know we've even looked at some of our external vendors that we deal with, or external clients, people that we have to keep in the know that this person is coming aboard. So we present it here as a tool for you. We have found it very helpful to break down what seems like an enormous task down into its bite-sized pieces. And you can keep that at the back of your mind, and we'll revisit again to also consider how we actually use it with our new employee. So moving forward, when we talk about the post-offer acceptance, and really that first stage, this is all about logistics, logistics, logistics. It's from the moment we pull the trigger to say, yes, you are coming aboard. Many companies will have, and I'm sure that you do, a checklist of items that's provided from, maybe your HR team, your HR business partners, or you've created one that you normally follow with any member of a team that's joined your organization in the past. So this can include having contracts signed and thinking about what that process might look like now as they remain remote. It's being able to set up data access and connecting with your IT department to get those laptops or computers or devices, security access, all lined up and set to go. And of course, working hand in hand with HR to ensure that we are ready come day one that this person can work. Admittedly, I know that this has been a challenge for some companies. We here at Robert Half, we are very fortunate that the company had made investments over the past several years, that when we had received a lot of the mandates in early March, that we were able to shift on a dime, and we went from about 1,000 people working remotely to over 14,000 in just a few days. But I know we have had and a lot of conversations with some of you as our clients to say, that's just not a luxury that some companies have. They might have some restrictions around how many people can actually be logged on to systems at one time. So Mike, I'm wondering if I could have you come back to explain a little bit about, so how have we navigated that? Because while it might not be everyone's challenge, I know you've personally been able to come alongside of some of the clients to solve for that. So how are you handling it?
Thanks, Cami. This is actually a really interesting area. So at Robert Half, we've actually supplied thousands of our consultants and temporaries with corporate laptops that are image ready to go, that we actually couriered to their house. So day one on their jobs from the client, they actually had technology. The other thing we have access to is the Amazon workspace. When a client talks about needing data integrity and security, Amazon Workspace is a virtual desktop where any information on it is fully secure. It can't be copied, no place for a thumb drive, the whole thing's in the cloud, so the client's information is very secure. And the third option would be imaging a candidate's laptop or consultant's laptop to actually have all the technology a client would need so that they're able to, day one, use their own technology to satisfy any work a client may have.
That's really helpful to know. And I know as we've held a number of these webinars on this topic, we generally have, a couple questions that come through on that. So thanks for the color on that, Mike. If you also think about the other important aspects of post-offer acceptance prior to that start date, is helping the individual to feel welcomed. Oftentimes, if you are shipping any sort of hardware or documents to an individual, is creating that welcome letter, highlighting company policies. If there has been set expectations around remote work and guidance that you're giving, or expectations around work hours, is helping them to think about what is helpful for them to know upon day one, so that they are not misinformed or that they just know what those expectations are out of the gates. One of the best practices that we have heard from many of you is the idea of having an onboarding mentor. We call it a workplace peer at Robert Half. As we have brought individuals on, this is somebody that oftentimes isn't even on the immediate team of this individual, but it's meant to be yet another person to make connections with in the organization, ask maybe cultural questions, company questions, be able to connect them to key leaders. As I mentioned, because our leadership development team offices from home when we're not working, when we hire people aboard, we oftentimes will hook them up with people that sit in our home office or some of our service centers, because in many cases they can actually, they might know key individuals, or if I was going looking for this resource, where might I find it? We have found and we have heard that it really is helpful to have yet another person in the village that they could reach out to when there might be questions. If they see that you're on meetings or in calls and they can't get that, they can't move forward, it can help to have some of those questions answered for them. And last but not least, you might think about dropping them into the meeting cadence. I'm sure that you have many team meetings. There might be meetings with you that you automatically want to schedule, looking at the one-to-one introductions of key members of your team or just in the organization as a whole, looking at blocking out the time for training. I think probably some of the greatest lessons learned for us is that, when we brought somebody aboard in our physical environment, we might have had the luxury of flying by the seat of our pants, if you will. Self-admitted, I had done that, where I'm thinking there's plenty of people that, if they saw that they had a question, that they could come alongside or they could walk into my office. But some of the physical distance made that a bit more challenging. So really thinking about looking at those for that first day, that first week, and just starting to block out that time. And again, if it's not on your calendar, just who might be able to fulfill that need for training, compliance, guidance, kicking off projects, and so on. As we move to the next stage of thinking about day one when they come aboard, is if the first date, this post offer was all around logistics, 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 this one is all about expectations, expectations, expectations. Every person coming aboard wants to be set up for success. They want to deliver and contribute in the way that you had intended. And they also want to feel a part of your organization and really understand how their work connects to the broader whole. I'm sure that many of this actually comes out of your interviews with them. But one of the things we recommend here, there's about 6 or 7 tips in here. One is, as you go forward, is help them to understand what are the goals of the role and revisit its impact. And more importantly, how does that connect with a greater mission, or how it drops into the products and services that you offer, so that it really brings meaning. Every individual wants to feel like they have work that matters. And some of them might not have insight to maybe the entire project. Maybe you're bringing on someone that's doing just a tiny part to that, but really reserving some time to review the company, the goals, and how that really connects to the broader whole, so they can feel connected to that, because they don't have the physical benefit of fitting into the company culture just yet. When we look at giving them insight into reviewing organizational charts, department overviews. I know some of you have really complex companies with a lot of different departmental structures. We had the same, I think. Some of our newest members who might know Robert Half, we have a lot of complexity around the way that we organize ourselves internally. So that can be really helpful just to give people a sense of how do they fit into the broader picture of the overall company. We also look at, there's some obvious ones, right? Mike, you spoke about giving access to the systems, but they need to know how to log on. You might have new hire orientation, you might have compliance training, you might have systems training that you have them go over in that first day, whether it's you or a member, say, of your HR business partners that might help them with new hire orientation. So making sure that you actually schedule time for them to focus on that. We do also want to think about clarifying some of those early tasks and what are the assumed outcomes. I think it's helpful for people to get a sense of how can they come in and immediately contribute. What are some of those low-hanging fruit projects that they can immediately begin to sink their teeth into, and how can they understand some of your expectations around completion dates and the urgency and what's to come in those first few days, as well as really looking at the span of the first month or two or however long they'll be with you. We also feel like it's time to reconfirm expectations. I think this doesn't only come down to their contributions, but again, if you have found a rhythm that has worked for your organization over the last 8 weeks, for example, when we can, we try to use video. We know that it really does connect us in ways that just being on a phone call doesn't. So there might just be some, these little expectations that's really helpful to share with people so that they can be successful to acclimate to your culture, because again, they may not pick up on it if they're not physically in your office space. And also just those things that you expect around communication, how feedback is shared, and how you want to set that up with them. Other things you might consider is we certainly have picked up in this remote environment the frequency of our touch points. If time is a funny thing right now with the pace of our business and how fast it's changing and moving, that we even if they're not a new employee, we have picked up the frequency of touch points, that it's gone from maybe once a week to now it could be daily. For some of the newest employees, they might need a couple of touch points with you that first day. And again, if that's not realistic to your schedule, who is that secondary touch point so that they can begin their day and have a chunk of time with you and then be able to revisit that to see what questions have come up for them along the way. We might also think about ensuring that they have a chance to meet the team. I know that was one thing that we put on to members of our team as they're joining. We give them a list of individuals that we want them to schedule one-on-ones or over the first couple weeks, just to get acclimated to the team, get to know people, understand their point of view, get their arms around how their work connects with them. So really setting that as an expectation on day one. And you might not have to always orchestrate that. You might be able to put that on to your new employee coming out to make sure to go ahead and reach out and get those scheduled. The whole idea is, when you're thinking about that first day, is what are some of those necessary things that you can do to set those solid expectations, that you've got clarity, that all of those things sometimes we take for granted when people are physically with us. How can we replicate it in the virtual environment and the remote environment when we're sitting in our homes accomplishing work together? When we move on to really looking at week one idea here, and it's oftentimes the best practice, is as we're onboarding, is the goal is how can we get them working autonomously as fast as possible. Some of that leads to expectations, but the other thing is getting detailed in that. We have a practice when we onboard individuals that we actually outline, we really look at it at a 90-day glance. And for instance, the individual that I brought on in third quarter of last year, I was able to identify 30 to 40 tasks, assignments, or key milestones that I'd like her to hit in 90 days. And some of those were really small tasks, from let's do the compliance training, or let's schedule a one-on-one meeting with these 5 members of the team. But what we did is we were able to outline all of these job duties and some of these deliverables, these projects, and be able to set some priority to them. What's interesting is that every company has a slightly different definition around what is urgent, what is not urgent, what are the important projects, what are the not important projects right now that just have to keep, you know, a kind of a slow burn that we have to have work done on it when we can afford to do it. But I think going through that, she and I both really sat down and looked at it as a whole and began to prioritize those so that when I was not available, and if she was kind of waiting on that next step, she had some insight into what are some other things that you might be able to be productive on, and oh, by the way, contribute to the organization so that it can help to give her a sense of autonomy, that it's not time wasted, that we can give some clarity. Because you know, if we don't really walk through that discussion around urgent or not urgent, you know, one of 3 things could happen. Either she's going to use the definition of how she would define it in her previous organization. She might, you know, rush to get things done because everything seems like a priority, or might be resistant and is waiting on direction, and some of these really key projects don't get the movement that they need. So we really did think it was helpful not just to think about it at maybe a week at a glance, but give some insight into what's the vision for this role in the first 30, 60, 90 days. The other focus here for onboarding in week 1 that can be a helpful tool, we're going to show you again the RACI model. This is also something that was really helpful for an individual to understand and get their arms around after you reveal the priorities, for them also to think about it just as you did on who could be responsible for this. Is it indeed them? Or does somebody else hold the responsibility? Some of you might actually be bringing on leaders of leaders, or just leaders of a team. So stepping through this and helping them to understand who would be responsible for those deliverables is really helpful. Clarifying who's accountable. And again, looking at who needs to be consulted in your organization and informed. Again, here, just being able to break that down, keep it simple, making sure that we have all of our bases covered is really important, especially when we're pressed for time. And when multiple people might be involved in onboarding, it really just provides some really clear direction. So again, here's another way that you can use it in thinking about how to set your person off and get them autonomous rather, help them to master their job as quickly as possible, and also give them meaningful work so they feel like they're contributing and really belong to your organization. When we look to transition into weeks 2 to 3, how we would define this is when somebody starts to get their sea legs, or at least we hope they are. It's a reminder here that, you know, many times they're highly focused on business objectives, but we also, especially with our internal leaders, we really talk about the importance of, we want this to be a good experience for employees as well. We want them to feel successful in the culture. We want them to feel attended to, that we've got to strike that balance, as you see with the scale, is that there's equal balance put to focus on the business outcomes as well as the people, and making sure we layer in connections that we can build upon the relationship, that we can help people to hear feedback that they desperately need in those first few weeks, that we can also hear the feedback back from them. This is where, at least for our organizations, and we know it to be true for others, instead of those daily touch points or maybe several times a week, it's always been a best practice of our team and many companies to at least have a weekly touch point. And I'll say, despite how busy we've been, those have been really key for us as leaders, so that we have that constant channel of anticipated time that, I guess in the case of our team, we use tools such as OneNote, where we just keep a running punch list of items that we have to discuss. We may get on the phone for those urgent impromptu meetings, but those things that can wait, we keep that ongoing punch list of items to talk about. And I also, we recommend to, you know, gather that feedback that we can be continuing to share with people around almost doing a SWOT analysis with them. SWOT is an acronym that stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And how we use it is a way to think about this individual coming into your organization, that what are those strengths that you observe? And sometimes those strengths are their hard skills. Sometimes those strengths are just their attitude or behaviors, their way of communicating that's going really well and helping others to move forward in the organization. What are some of those weaknesses that you observe? And this could just be, they just haven't had enough time in the seat to learn it yet, but mentally they need to know, what do you observe from them? And it's a great way to just get clear and be prepared for some of those weekly meetings. Looking at opportunities and threats, we really look deeply at this now as an organization, because we know that this environment right now has been so unpredictable, but it's also provided a ton of opportunity for people to step up and contribute really creative, innovative ideas. We've been able to put skill sets to work that we just previously weren't able to tap into. So opportunities gives us a chance to really look at this individual to say, you know what, they're kind of deep in this project right now, but I would love for them to be able to be aligned with this next initiative for our company, and being able to verbalize kind of your vision for that person or for them to share that back. And then, threats in our current environment, we have a lot of them. A lot of the threats could be staff reductions. Some of the threats is just the unpredictability around, when will the local governments kind of release us all to go back to somewhat of a, normal state in working together. And we really look at that to just be mindful of, what are some of these threats that I need to be aware of that could be a threat to their focus, a threat to their productivity, a threat to them feeling fully engaged, and just feeling like they're being as productive as they can be. So we try to save a space to just be aware of that, because we know it is so pronounced in, especially over these last 8 weeks, and probably will be for the foreseeable future. So again, I think that the key part in weeks 2 to 4 is really, how can we set them up for the long-term success? How can we not lose sight that we want to continue to build relationships short of being with each other physically, as well as we've got to move the business forward, and hopefully carving out conversations that can be focused on both. I know for us internally, quite frankly, like every one-on-one might run a little differently. Sometimes we are focused more on the personal, as we have seen a lot of business shift. As you and your needs as our clients have shifted, there's presented new business opportunities or challenges that we have to put our heads together and overcome. And sometimes the focuses of those meetings is just helping someone to navigate the personal challenges they're overcoming with the fact that they've got distance learners at home. They may not have the best setup in their home to have a dedicated office space, and it's really providing a lot of distraction that they really can't help, but we might have to solve for that, or just have other ideas around how do we work around those things. So it's really with the goal of helping people to feel, secure in their role, that we're being able to provide feedback on the things that we see from them, that we pay attention, that we're helping them to feel like they belong in the organization, even if they're on a contract basis. Although they may not be a long-term professional with you, we still want them to feel engaged, and we want them to be contributing. We want them to build relationships, because we really know that when trust and those relationships are there, work just is able to get done a lot faster. And we also want them to have work that matters and be able to sink their teeth into assisting the organization as best they can. Mike, I thought it might be interesting to give some insight into our conversation that we were having around, so how are the leaders that are working with you navigating kind of relinquishing the control? Because the fact of the matter is, when we went to the remote environment, there was this need to control for good reasons, and establish and let the dust settle in the team. So, maybe you want to share a few ideas of what you heard, or how your own team or what clients have also shared, how they've adjusted to, kind of the ongoing management, if you will.
Yeah, Cami, this is a really interesting area, because if you think back, we're in the 7th week. And in the first week, I think a lot of leaders tended to go under stress, and they tended to overmanage and control. And I think in here, you have to trust your teams that they're going to do what's right and do their job. And when you have clear expectations on communication and the process to follow, whether it be when you have a question, you talked about the office peer buddy, whether it go to be the team lead or team supervisor, or when they actually come to the manager with high-level questions, if you have those sort of parameters set clear, and we're not over-managing or over-controlling, everybody's gonna have a much better level of comfort in executing on what they have to do. So trust your people.
Well, and that's not always easy because some of that, right? I mean, some of that behavior came from just managing the unknowns, and that's, really common stress behavior. I'm sure some of you on the phone might be thinking, yes, I am in that, right? I feel the need that if I can't control anything else out in the world right now, I can control how I'm going to kind of manage the team to get things done. So some of it's self-preservation, some of it's just kind of unwinding from our own stress behaviors that are happening.
And it really took us, I think, in the first week to get over that control, to then let our teams and our valuable people who have so much to contribute to actually execute on that contribution. So it did take us a little bit of time to get there.
Yeah. And we definitely heard from kind of many of you that are joining us online that this seems to be a universal challenge. I don't think that, we certainly don't pretend to have all the answers. I think we've learned a lot over these last several weeks, and we continue to think about it as an organization. We still have a lot of leaders who are challenged with, not just onboarding new employees, but what's the ongoing management look like? So with that, I did want to open it up to Q&A. And I know, Kristen, you'll help us out with, navigating some of that. But I guess as we help you to think about maybe some questions that you might have for us and give you some time to think about what you want to ask. Mike, I know you mentioned that you were actually getting a lot of questions from some clients. So maybe you want to kick it off with that common question you're getting.
Yeah, so one of the most common questions we've been getting is when I'm bringing on a new hire or I'm bringing on a contractor, what role does the Robert Half staff manager, career manager play in that whole process? And it comes down to a couple things. So out of the gate initially, it's a lot of the communication, ensuring that the candidate and the hiring company understand sort of the background and the culture of both the person that they're hiring, and then the new hire has an idea of a better understanding of what the company culture is like. And then it moves from there on to really the quality control. If you've hired from us before, we are often in touch on the first day, second, third day, making sure both the person is doing well, and then when we talk to the new hire, that they're enjoying the role. So you're getting both sides get a lot of true honesty as how it's going. When you hire on your own, you may ask them, hey, how's day one going? And you get the thumbs up, it's going great. But when we're involved, you get a real honest feedback of what it's looking like. And then going forward, we set schedules to how often we want to chat with each other about the progress you're making. It comes down to a full sort of high touch, high involvement post-placement process. We're involved because we want you to be very successful.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And even to the extent that Robert Half is not involved in your hiring, I know that that's somewhat of a best practice of many of your organizations, that there might be a touch point from your HR business partner. There might be a skip meeting, kind of a skip boss or leader that steps in periodically to do some touch points. But to the extent that you're actually actively working with Robert Half and maybe you're looking to bring the first contractor or kind of set that into motion, I think it's helpful because we definitely get that question a lot. Especially if it's somewhat of a new process for you.
Yeah, those skip meetings are crucial when you have a new person start. It's great to actually spend some time with your manager's manager to find out what was the process like? How was the onboarding? Because companies invest a lot of time and money making sure a new hire does feel welcome, and it's great to hear how it actually was. So skip meetings are fantastic.
That's great.
Tammy and Michael, we do happen to have a couple of questions that have come in through the Q&A chat. So if I may throw one to you, I do think we have a technical question which we might want to utilize Scott Melba from our business transformation group, but I will start with one of the questions if that's okay. Cami, do you happen to have an example of what a RACI chart looks like And will we, I guess, will we be sending that out, which I know there is a RACI model that we could send out as a follow-up, certainly, but any examples of what a RACI chart looks like?
So I've seen very complicated versions of that. And for those of you that are project management professionals, you might be thinking about me, those can get quite complicated. But I do know that there's some, I literally did mine on paper and it probably tossed it away now. But I do think that, and perhaps if we know of the individual, if there could be just a sharing of an email address, I know that we could provide you an example. It looks like somewhat of a matrix. Because it is indeed just that. And it does be able to drop in people's names. If you think about, the tasks are listed on the left-hand side, and those responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed is across the top. And it just begins to drop in people's names, or it might be a function to say that this is actually our HRBP who handles that, or this is going to be the CFO that will be helpful. So if you could provide an email address, we're happy to send on an example, or Kristen, maybe we could even include that for the broader audience just to take a peek at what that looks like.
Certainly. And Cami, I do happen to have a generic RACI model Excel spreadsheet that we could certainly send out. And I think Laura would like a copy as well. So we'll make sure that we get that out to all of the participants. We have a question from Ruby, which I actually love this question, which we have not had before in any of the countries that we've done these webinars. Do you have any suggestions for onboarding executives, and what might that look like? So an executive versus maybe an individual contributor or even a supervisor.
Yeah. So we certainly have some thoughts because that does, the level of complexity, the key stakeholders, the fact that, they likely would have multiple layers of leaders, it kind of takes that, whole thought and multiplies it several times over. So I know that with some of the senior most people they're in many cases responsible for strategy. So some of those early meetings, and some of these actually take place maybe before they even start, but where the executive team is actually meeting with them. Oftentimes they might meet with board members to get a sense of what is their point of view from a stakeholder perspective. How can they have early insight into the strategy? Chances are they're likely being brought on for a very specific reason. It might actually be taking over somebody, perhaps it's succession planning. And it's just a matter of you've got somebody who retired and now it's carrying the torch forward. But we know that it oftentimes started with those key relationships and establishing those relationships and that communication early on to be as in sync and communicative with not only the company and its mission, but the direction in which they're heading. So oftentimes there might be insight into the 5-year planning strategy. It might be scheduling early meetings before they actually, start working with their direct reports so that they have clarity. Because the fact of the matter is when those executives get into their role, they will also have to layer in their direct report meetings and, start to get curious around what's the reality for each one of them. So I think many cases, while a lot of our recommendations was very tactical for, say, an individual contributor or kind of the first level line leader, a leader of leaders, when it sits at the very top, a lot of it starts with building the relationships, building the trust, having insight into the strategy. And, that might look a little bit different as far as how your company shares that and what's the cadence and what level of interaction will they have with the board? What level of interaction are they going to have, with their key direct reports, and where are they dropping in to the company process, if you will?
Thank you. Mike, do you have any additional comments on that?
Cami hit a lot of the key areas, and it comes down to all those key meetings. The only other piece I'd layer in would be the executive colleagues, and these may be across the country or it may even be international. It's making sure you've built those relationships, because that's going to sort of be your foundation of support as you get accustomed to the company, especially as you want to start making changes. So make sure you're having a foundation of colleague support for the person, and that may take some help from the executive to start with.
Perfect. We do have an anonymous question, and it is one that I think we might need our business transformation manager, Scott Melba, to answer for us. And the question is that we typically need technical services to set up laptops with NAV or network access to specific company files or folders. And those files or folders are tailored to the new hire. How could that be coordinated with Robert Half laptops?
Yeah, so at the discretion of our clients, our candidates have several options available actually. Candidates could utilize their own personal device and potentially access the client's network via VPN if that's accessible or available. Alternately, we could provide, as Mike mentioned earlier, a loaner laptop, a Robert Half laptop that's provisioned by our IT department. So our IT folks could work with the client's IT folks to configure the device as necessary. That sounds like it's probably a custom solution that we'd have to work with you on, but we could certainly work with you to accomplish that. And then thirdly, I think Mike also mentioned the Amazon Workspace option, which gives candidates access to a secure environment where they could work as well and potentially install any software that is required for their role.
Yeah. I think we're doing everything we can to make sure that all of our customers, regardless of their size, we're trying to say yes to as many options as possible to keep your companies thriving, certainly. I believe we might have one more question from Haley. We have a situation in which the employee just started remotely during this lockdown period, but at the same time, his or her position falls into a work share arrangement. So he or she is requiring only to work a number of days and the rest of it's on EI. Obviously, that may trigger disappointment, as Haley knows that this individual may or may not have given up another opportunity for this. Mike, this is probably to you. In your experience, how are clients handling this, or do you have any ideas on how we should best handle that situation?
This is one of those scenarios that 7 weeks ago didn't really exist. So unfortunately, we're in this unprecedented time when many people's employment status has changed. So even when you onboard a person, unfortunately, in the last 7 weeks, it has changed. Many people will be thankful that they have an opportunity, they still have a job, but the reality is they're on a work share. So long as you're staying in constant communication with them and we're supporting them through this process, the end result's going to be that hopefully, as we keep hearing the tone change from our government leaders, we will be back to some kind of normal soon. I would be talking about sort of what a timeline could look like or where you see it going. But unfortunately, because of the COVID scenario, things happen very fast. But most people right now are just very thankful they actually have a great opportunity to go to.
Thank you so much, Mike. And I think that is the last of our questions. And I'd like to hand it back, Cami, to you and Mike, please.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say thank you for joining us on the webinar today. I'll say that, it certainly has been an interesting journey over the last 8 weeks for our own organization. And we know that has been the same case for you. But, I think the other thing is this has now caused us to have conversations that in many cases we didn't think was going to be on us for 5 to 10 years. I think it has fast forwarded the sheer reality that we're somewhat proving out that where people desire that more workplace flexibility, it's really causing us and challenging us as leaders to really think about, is this sustainable? Can it work? Can people be as productive? Can we keep our culture moving forward if we're not physically together? So I would say that it's been a really interesting and exciting time to really imagine what the future is going to look like for us, even as we do return to some normalcy. So I just wanted to say thank you on my behalf, on behalf of the organization too, for joining us. And Mike, I'll pass it to you to close us out.
Thank you, Cami. I am thrilled some of you chose to join us today. We thank you very much for the long-term partnership we have had together. I know many of you are at stages where you are having to onboard, knowing that this new normal is going to be here for a while on some stage, but business does have to go on. And we're hearing stories every day about successfully onboarding new hires and them being very successful in their first few weeks. Thank you very much, Cami. It's always great to join you. Thank you, Kristen, and thank you, Scott Melba. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.